crisp autumn air clung to the hills of rural Colorado as David Harper, a retired Marine in his early 50s, finished his morning run along the winding trail behind his remote log cabin. The mountain silence was familiar and grounding, a buffer against the memories that still haunted him from 3 tours in Afghanistan. Every morning, this run was his ritual, a way to feel present, to reclaim peace. But on this day, something was off. Too quiet. No bark, no scrambling paws against the wooden porch. No Shadow. For 4 years, Shadow, his loyal German Shepherd, had never missed a greeting. Rain, snow, or shine, the dog was always there, tail thumping against the deck, eyes bright with welcome. Today, nothing. A sharp chill ran down David's spine, far colder than the mountain air. "Shadow," he called, his voice echoing across the trees. Silence. Instinct kicked in. David scanned the yard, eyes catching the gate that should have been locked tight. It stood slightly ajar, swinging lazily in the wind. His heart rate spiked as if back on a battlefield. Without hesitation, he sprinted down the gravel drive, boots crunching over loose stone, toward the main road that snaked through the valley below. Halfway down, the rumble of an old pickup broke the stillness. Sarah Kingsley, his closest neighbor, 2 miles away, pulled up beside him, face pale, eyes wide with urgency. "David, I was coming to find you. It's Shadow. He's been hit by a car near our fence line." The world tilted. "Is he?" "He's alive," she cut in quickly. "Barely. Joe's with him. We've called Dr. Athay. She's meeting us at the clinic." David jumped in without another word. As the truck lurched forward, he stared ahead, fists clenched, mind spinning with questions and terror. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline. The silent guardian who had pulled David back from the edge more times than he could count. Now, it was his turn to fight, to do whatever it took to save the one soul who had never given up on him. The emergency room at the small Evergreen Valley Veterinary Clinic buzzed with tense energy as David Harper stood frozen just inside the doorway. His boots, still dusted with gravel from the hurried drive, felt anchored to the floor as he watched the vet techs wheel Shadow through the hallway on a gurney. Blood matted the dog's once sleek black and tan coat. His right leg hung limp, twisted unnaturally, and his hindquarters looked crushed. The shallow rise and fall of Shadow's ribcage was the only sign he was still clinging to life. Dr. Catherine Athay, a seasoned veterinarian who had treated Shadow since the beginning, glanced up at David with a mixture of urgency and compassion. "We're taking him straight back for assessment," she said, already in motion. "I'm coming," David replied, voice low but unwavering. It wasn't a request. In the sterile exam room, the team worked quickly, inserting IVs, adjusting monitors, and stabilizing vitals. David remained at a respectful distance, close enough for Shadow to sense him. His combat-hardened nerves trembled, not from fear of injury, but from the dread of losing his partner. Dr. Athay moved from Shadow's side, her hands bloodied but steady. "David," she said softly, "he has multiple fractures in the front leg, possible internal bleeding, and severe trauma to the hips. I won't lie to you. This is very serious." David didn't blink. His face was stone, the kind of controlled stillness only war can teach. But inside his chest burned with helpless fury. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was the reason David had survived post-war life. He'd pulled David back from the abyss of PTSD when no one else could. "What are our options?" she hesitated. Even with surgery, full mobility might not return. Recovery would be long, painful, uncertain. Some would consider euthanasia the kindest choice. The word struck David like shrapnel. Euthanasia? No. Not this dog. Not after everything. "No," he said, the syllable sharp final. "That's not an option." Dr. Athay studied him, saw the battle lines being drawn, not of muscle and bone, but of loyalty and love. "All right," she nodded. "Then we stabilize him and we fight." And with that, a new war began. A war without gunfire. But with every heartbeat, David knew it was a battle he had to win. Monitors beeped steadily in the background, a rhythm that felt both mechanical and ominous. Shadow lay motionless on the cold metal exam table, tubes and wires running across his broken body. Despite the emergency medications now coursing through his veins, his vitals were dropping, too fast. The veterinary team moved in tight formation around him, their focus razor sharp, their movements rehearsed but urgent. David stood just outside the circle, jaw clenched, his fingers twitching at his sides, desperate to do something, anything, but helpless against what was unfolding before him. Dr. Athay didn't sugarcoat it. "We're losing him," she said flatly, her voice professional but weighted with regret. "His body's shutting down." David's knees nearly buckled, but he steadied himself against the wall. The room blurred slightly around the edges. All the battles he had survived, ambushes, IEDs, the long war of silence when he returned home, none of it had prepared him for this moment. He stepped forward, his boots thudding softly on the linoleum floor, and reached for Shadow's ear, the one that always twitched when David spoke to him. He leaned in close. "Hey, soldier," he whispered hoarsely, his voice thick with grief. "You don't get to leave me now. Not after everything. Not after you pulled me back from the edge." A tear escaped the corner of David's eye and dropped onto Shadow's blood-matted fur. Then, something happened. The monitor let out a soft chirp, subtle but unmistakable. Dr. Athay turned her head sharply toward the screen. Shadow's heart rate had stabilized slightly but clearly. "Did you see that?" a vet tech whispered. Shadow exhaled a faint, shallow breath that sounded almost like a sigh. His ear twitched ever so slightly, then again, and then his tail moved just a fraction of an inch against the table. David crouched lower, tears now streaming freely. "That's it, buddy. I'm right here. You fight. You hear me? You fight." Dr. Athay stood frozen for a second, then moved back into action. "Prep him for transfer," she commanded. "We've got a chance." In that room, between the beep of machines and the whisper of a broken man, something unexplainable had taken place. Shadow wasn't done. Not yet. He had heard his partner's call, and he had answered. As Shadow lay sedated in the back of the makeshift ambulance, his vitals still fragile, David gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled focus, eyes fixed on the mountain road ahead. Each turn brought them closer to Denver's advanced surgical center, but his mind wasn't entirely on the drive. It drifted, inevitably, back to the beginning, to the moment he and Shadow, both wounded in different ways, had found each other. It had been 2 years after David's honorable discharge from the Marines. The medals meant little. The scars, both visible and hidden, never truly healed. Life in the civilian world was like walking through fog with landmines underfoot. Medication dulled the edge, therapy offered routine, but nothing filled the hollow ache left by war. Sleep was no longer rest, it was survival. And the cabin in Evergreen Valley, once chosen as a refuge, had become a prison built of silence. Then came a phone call from his old commanding officer, Captain Rivera. "There's a program working with military dogs. Some of them didn't make it in the field, but still have purpose." "I think it's time, Harper." David had scoffed. "I'm not a dog person." "Neither was I," Rivera replied, "until one saved my life." Skeptical but desperate, David had driven down to a training facility outside Colorado Springs. He was introduced to several dogs, obedient, friendly, ready for service. But none of them felt right. Then he saw him. In a far corner kennel, a young German shepherd sat silently, eyes watchful, not barking, not pacing, just watching. "That's Shadow," the director had said. "He washed out of explosive detection training. Too gentle, too selective with handlers." David had approached the gate cautiously. "What's wrong with him?" "Nothing. He just chooses who to trust. He's had a hard time attaching." And then something neither expected happened. Shadow slowly approached, sniffed David's outstretched fingers, and leaned his head against the gate, seeking contact. In that quiet moment, David had felt something he hadn't in years. Connection. He hadn't known it then, but that silent gesture, simple, soft, and sure, would change his life. Two souls, discarded by the systems meant to shape them, had chosen each other. And from that moment on, they were no longer alone. The sterile air inside the Denver Surgical Center clung to David Harper like a second skin as he watched the medical team wheel Shadow through the double doors. The doors hissed shut behind them, severing the last line of sight to the only soul who had ever truly understood him. For the first time in years, David felt unanchored, like a soldier separated from his unit in hostile territory. Dr. Marcus Chen, the head surgeon, had explained everything in blunt, clinical terms. Shadow's pelvis was shattered, his right front leg fractured in multiple places, and internal bleeding had been managed just long enough to get him to surgery. This would be a high-risk, multi-phase operation. Hours under anesthesia, months of recovery, and no promises. David had nodded, absorbing every word, but what mattered more than prognosis was purpose. "Do everything," he'd said, "whatever it takes." Now, he sat alone in the waiting area, staring at the floor as time warped around him. Hours passed like minutes, or maybe it was the other way around. Updates came in from the surgical nurses, vital signs stable, internal bleeding under control, orthopedic reconstruction underway. Each report offered a flicker of hope, but it was the long silences in between that gnawed at him. He remembered the night Shadow had first jumped on his bed, breaking protocol to pull David from a nightmare so vivid he'd woken in a cold sweat, fists clenched, heart racing. That dog hadn't just interrupted a bad dream, he had rescued him from the past. And now, David could only hope to do the same. At 3:17 a.m., Dr. Chen reappeared, surgical mask pulled down, fatigue etched into his features. But there was something else in his eyes, something steady. "He made it through phase 1, he said. "Internal injuries are stabilized. We placed external fixators on the leg and performed the initial reconstruction of the pelvis. It was worse than expected, but he fought." David exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. "When can I see him?" "Soon," Dr. Chen replied. "But I want you to know, his chances improved because of you. He responded to your voice, even sedated. That bond, it's not just emotional. It may be the reason he's still alive." David nodded slowly, eyes wet but unblinking. "Then we keep fighting, together." The days following Shadow's surgery were a blur of antiseptic smells, blinking monitors, and whispered updates. David Harper barely left his side. The apartment arranged by the VA was just across the street from the surgical center, but he only used it to shower and catch fleeting moments of rest. Most of his time was spent beside Shadow's padded recovery enclosure, speaking softly, offering quiet encouragement, or simply sitting in silence, being there. Progress was slow, agonizingly so. Shadow remained heavily sedated, his legs suspended in a cage of external fixators, his pelvis stabilized by titanium plates. But David noticed the smallest things others might miss. A flicker of recognition in Shadow's eyes, a barely perceptible tail movement when David entered the room. He wasn't just surviving, he was present. The turning point came one rainy afternoon. James Harrington, a seasoned canine rehabilitation specialist with the VA, had joined David for their first physical therapy session. Normally, in this early stage, the team handled all exercises, but Dr. Chen had made a special exception. He'd seen what Shadow could do when David was near. "Let's try something," Harrington said. With careful instruction, David learned to perform passive range of motion stretches on Shadow's good limbs. Nothing strenuous, just enough to keep the muscles from atrophying. Shadow didn't resist. In fact, he leaned into David's touch, the subtle tension in his body easing. It was the first physical sign of cooperation and trust. Over the next few days, they built on that connection. Together with Harrington and the rehab team, David developed a unique plan, turning Shadow's therapy into a modified version of their old routine. Stretching became equipment checks. Position shifts were treated like deployment drills. Even medication time was framed as a mission, and it worked. Shadow responded, not like a patient, but like a soldier back in training. He grew more alert, his vitals improved, and emotionally, something shifted. That look returned to his eyes, the same steady, unshakable focus David had seen during their years of service together. It wasn't just recovery, it was a resurrection of identity. For Shadow, regaining strength wasn't about walking again, it was about purpose. And for David, helping him heal became more than duty, it became redemption. Together, they were rewriting the rules of recovery, and they were doing it on their own terms. It was just past dawn when David Harper noticed something was wrong. Shadow, who had been steadily improving for weeks, now lay still in his orthopedic bed, eyes glazed, chest rising too quickly, too shallow. His breathing was labored, and his body, always warm to the touch, was running hot, far too hot. David knelt beside him, gently placing a hand along his flank. The area around the hip surgical site was inflamed, swollen, and radiating heat. A sound escaped Shadow's throat. Not a bark, not a whine, but a soft, pained moan David hadn't heard since the accident. Panic surged, but David's training took over. With the precision of a man who'd handled battlefield triage, he checked vitals, recorded changes, then called Dr. Chen's emergency line. His voice was steady, but his insides churned with dread. Within minutes, a medical transport team arrived. As they loaded Shadow onto the gurney, David rode alongside, one hand resting gently on the dog's shoulder, speaking quietly. "You hold on, soldier. We're not done yet." At the surgical center, the atmosphere turned clinical and intense. Dr. Chen and his team ran rapid diagnostics. Blood work confirmed their worst fears. A post-operative infection had taken root near one of the anchor points in Shadow's reconstructed pelvis. It hadn't spread systemically yet, but it was dangerously close. Dr. Chen gathered David and the specialists. "We have two options," he said grimly. "Treat aggressively with antibiotics and monitor closely, or remove the infected hardware and start over. A major surgery that would set his recovery back by months." David didn't hesitate. "We fight. Start the antibiotics." Everyone understood the risk. If the infection didn't respond, they might lose not only the reconstruction, but Shadow himself. Over the next 48 hours, David rarely left the ICU. He sat by Shadow's side, feeding him ice chips, cooling him with damp cloths, whispering the same phrases that had once pulled him back from the edge. The monitors offered no promises, just numbers ticking upward or downward in maddening rhythm. Then, subtle changes. The fever eased. The swelling receded. Shadow's eyes, dulled by pain, flickered with awareness again. It wasn't over. Not yet. But they had made it through the fire once more, together. 3 weeks after the infection scare, Shadow was back in outpatient rehabilitation, his vitals stable, the antibiotics doing their job. But something deeper had shifted, something beyond the medical charts and therapy milestones. Dr. Chen noticed it first. "I've treated military working dogs for 15 years, he told David Harper during a follow-up. "What I'm seeing here goes beyond recovery. This is loyalty at a level science can't quantify." Shadow's progress defied protocol. Though still limited in movement, he anticipated the rehab routines before they even began. Eyes alert, ears twitching, tail giving the slightest flick with recognition. But what stunned the staff most was his response whenever David entered the room. Monitors reflected measurable changes, lowered heart rate, improved oxygen saturation, even subtle neurological responses, as if the presence of his handler was as therapeutic as any medication. Every day, David continued their adapted service rituals, modified check-ins, controlled movements that mirrored old commands, environmental awareness drills reimagined for a dog confined to limited mobility. And Shadow thrived. The structure, the purpose, it wasn't just helping him heal, it was helping him live. But there was still one unspoken question hanging in the air. One every therapist, doctor, and VA specialist was too cautious to ask out loud. What if Shadow could never return to full service? What if the roles had to shift permanently? David already had the answer. He had seen too many comrades lost in battle, too many left behind in the name of practicality. Shadow wasn't just a tool or a therapy device. He was a brother in arms. A soul that had stood watch through David's darkest nights, who had guided him through panic attacks, who had made silence bearable. So when the service dog program coordinator gently asked if David might consider training with a support animal just until Shadow was fully healed, David looked down at the dog lying beside him, head nestled on his boot, and answered softly but firmly, "No, we're still a team." That afternoon, as David leaned in to whisper his usual command, just like always, "Soldier," Shadow responded with a slow, deliberate movement. He lifted his paw, shaky but sure, and placed it on David's hand. It said everything, and it changed nothing, because true partnership doesn't end when the mission changes. It simply adapts, together, always. In the end, the story of David and Shadow isn't just about recovery. It's about resilience, loyalty, and the unspoken bond that forms when two wounded souls choose to fight for each other. It's a testament to what happens when we look beyond the physical and see the heart that beats beneath the fur, the soul that listens without judgment, and the spirit that refuses to give up, even when every odd says it should. Shadow was never just a dog. He was a guardian, a healer, a silent companion through sleepless nights and haunted memories. And David, hardened by war and softened by devotion, gave Shadow what every living being deserves: a second chance, patience, and unconditional love. Their journey reminds us that animals are not objects or accessories. They are sentient beings, capable of deep emotion, fierce loyalty, and extraordinary courage. When we treat them with kindness, respect, and compassion, they give back in ways that transcend understanding. Not every dog will rescue a veteran from the brink, Not every pet will fight back from the edge of death, but every animal, given the chance, has the potential to change a life, sometimes even save it. So let this story be more than just something you watch and forget. Let it stir something within you. Cherish the animals in your life. Speak up for those who cannot. Support rescue efforts. Be the person your dog believes you are. Because in the quiet spaces between words and the stillness of unspoken love, we find the kind of connection that heals, not just broken bones, but broken hearts. And that, perhaps, is the greatest miracle of all.